Dr. Lehohla, thank you so very much for joining us here on CheckPoint, the podcast. We've branded it, What's the Real Problem? You know, the show is 12 years old. We turned 12 in April.
Is that so?
And yes, we're just a year younger than the EFF. It's just this useless fact for you to remember.
I see. That's why you are putting on red.
No, that's not the reason. But in the lead up to our birthday, we are looking back at the decade of CheckPoint and some of the issues that we've covered that don't seem to be improving. Some of them actually are getting worse. And I know something that's very close to your heart as an individual, and a professor and a doctor and an intellectual, is the school dropout rate in this country.
When you ask those real problems, you then can connect Sandton to Alfred Nzo municipality. And then we'll see where the real problem is.
How I started to actually be interested in the school dropout rate was not only because it's sad and it's a tragedy, but it also impacts our high youth unemployment rate. First of all, at the age of 15, a child in South Africa can leave school. There's no legal instrument that is there that can force you to keep a child in school when they're over the age of 15. They can work. They're eligible to work, which for me is tragic because surely we should be keeping our children in school for at least until 18, 19, so that their prospects of getting employment actually improve. One, why is the working age 15 years? I know it is the same in many, many countries, but why is the working age 15 years old? Because that's a child as far as I'm concerned.
Yes, I mean, it is that way. You can start working at 15. These days of AI, you even start working at 5. And then you start earning, which at times creates very, very problematic things in life, in the social life of children who are exposed to social media, camera, and so on, acting and everything. So all those things are things that we have to contend with.
So school becomes optional, basically.
It shouldn't be optional because you got to get people to understand, to socialize. The process of socializing it's a social issue. It's a universal social issue. How you socialize people into becoming young people, into being middle-aged people, into being adults, and how you manage their death in the end. And therefore, how you manage society. And education as a socializing agent. Attention has to be drawn to it by everybody at the beginning of that education. For instance, if you take a cluster like Sandton and so on, not only do they have a pass rate of above 80%, they also have an admission rate at university of over 70% compared to somebody who is from Alfred Nzo, where the possibility of going to admission at a higher institution is only 15%, only of the 15% of them. So you can see where the disparities are. I mean, one of the things is that South Africans, when you ask them what is their major problem, it will be electricity, water, sanitation, and so all those things. Education is priority number 15. And politics, the ballot, talks about those things. Water, sanitation. So no politician talks about education. They'll not get a vote because they don't promise us water and electricity and so on. When they promise us education, and we know what the outcomes of education are in terms of employment status, you say, well, that thing of yours is useless. So that's why it's number 15.
Do we as a nation not prioritize education? Is that what you're saying?
The evidence is that it is not a priority. It is not because it is not a priority. It is because
there are
it's
greater
they are
priorities.
not that the outcomes of it don't allocate it the priority it should be because of absence of systems design and design thinking. When you embed design thinking and systems design into our body politic as well as our planning systems, then you will know the value of education and why the child should be at school. And the outcomes in Alfred and Zoe will be the same as the ones in Santon. But when the outcomes of 90% of the population are the ones like the ones at Alfred and Zoe, there is no benefit of education that is visible.
The statistics show us that the higher education level you reach, the more likely you will get employment.
That's
and
true.
succeed.
Graduate unemployment is
it's lower.
It's lower. It's 13%, 14%
it's still there.
Yeah,
that's the problem.
But it's much lower than when you likely to be 60% unemployed. And graduate unemployment occurs because of the design that doesn't allow to absorb people. The design that doesn't produce the kind of graduate you'd like to employ or the graduate that would employ themselves. So
are they unemployable? Is that what you're saying?
We are in a negative cycle. That's the problem. So everything that we are trying to touch is negative because the root cause and the root cause analysis is wrong. We don't have the tools of interrogation that enable us to get to ask the right questions. And once you don't ask the right questions, you are never going to get the right answer. When you look at the intricacies of education, the intricacies of the pain of parenting, and the pain of parenting, when you look at this analysis, this Lehohla legend, you'll see the pain of parenting, and you can see it is concentrated in specific areas. Not that they are isolated or small. They are specific and big. And the drivers are embedded, they are systemic. And then you have to ask yourself, what does it take to get out of it?
What does it take?
It's a second liberation.
Which will entail?
It will entail looking at where we were, where we are now, what are the drivers of that? Essentially, the drivers of this are extraction. Once we are extractive in our mentality, in every walk of life in South Africa, we are extractive. The victims are extractive because they are extracted themselves. So it's a cycle.
And the national dialogue, will that achieve anything?
Well, I don't know if they don't look at, it's one thing to know that things are bad. It's another to understand what are the drivers of that.
Yeah, why?
So that you have to actually go and say, this is where the problem is. And we can mobilize society on the basis of this problem.
When we looked at the dropout rate with the Free State last year, scoring the highest in matric results, we asked the education department whether they don't think dropping out is one of the biggest challenges that they have. And they said no, because they are retaining. The kids are staying in the system. They are repeating. Isn't that just as bad?
Well, it's just bad. I mean, you don't have to keep children. You don't have to have repetition. I mean, when you do cohort analysis, you'll realize that the progression that you are achieving as a consequence of repeat rates is a perpetual decline. And the metrics are bad in that the idea is to have people to pass metric. And anything that stops them from passing metric is removed.
Yeah.
So
including the children themselves.
They trade in the people and they use the people as currency. So the people are both the product of trade and the currency of trade. And the merchant is the politician.
So should this public announcement of matric results be done away with? Because it really doesn't give us a good sense of how we're doing as a country.
Well, I mean, it's a charade. It's a charade. Every year we go through this whole thing. And we've gotten into this such that we forget to reflect on those who have not gone through.
We also went on the ground to find some of these dropouts, some of these young people who had dropped out of school, and nobody followed up on them. So it's almost like good riddance. You were doing badly, so good riddance. You won't actually play a role in our final results that will be announced to the nation.
You think the people who have succeeded, or rather who are living good life, would like to see their comrades at the moment? The better they are where they are, can't touch something because they're embarrassed. That's the philosophy that we have come to. It is exactly that is coming through as a drag.
We are flushing them out.
Yes, we're flushing everybody. Wherever there is what we have labeled unsuccessful by our own making. We don't want to see that. Because I think the deep sense of guilt, and you don't want to see your guilt in your face every morning. Stashed away from you, the better.
We reached out to Stats SA at the time that we were working on the story to look at who is dropping out and why. And majority are boys who drop out. And the top reasons were no money for fees was like 26% of the children saying no money for fees, and Gauteng featured as the highest with that reason. Children saying they have no money for fees.
What you are seeing there, the reasoning that 26% say there is no money for school.
Yeah.
And then there is no food at home. And when the school doesn't open, the feeding doesn't occur. And there is no mathematics that can be taught, or there's no capacity for the brain to absorb subjects when the stomach is hungry.
You said a hungry mind cannot process complex calculus.
Absolutely not. Only when it is hungry for calculus. But when it is hungry for food, then you can't even start being hungry for calculus.
Poor performance is also one of the top reasons, the second top reason.
Well, when there's no teacher, how can you perform? So there are barriers in front of a child in South Africa to acquire education. And that is anchored in an extractive system.
Government would point at no fee paying schools and the feeding schemes that they have as their intervention.
No, you see, that's where you bring charity ahead of Ubuntu. Ubuntu is not charity. Ubuntu is people living to their fullest and providing opportunity for them to live to their fullest.
To reach their full potential.
Yes, it cannot be charity. Who is the national economist who we should go to when the economy is not performing? Do you know who it is? Who is that person?
You tell me.
There isn't. So the whole responsibility is diluted across arm of us systems of the Reserve Bank, the Treasury, the Ministry of Trade and Industry, not taking account of if we are not growing at 3.5, who gets fired, or 5%.
Who do you think should get fired?
You have to have a national economist who has to pull all these guys. And we know that that's the door we'll knock at, just as we will knock at the door of statisticians. Otherwise, this thing is so dispersed, it's so amorphous.
Not and even the president will take responsibility.
No, nobody. There is no marksman that you can hit.
Do you see light at the end of this dark tunnel? Because These are our children's futures that we're talking about, the future of the country.
Unfortunately, I can't see light in the mix of the GNU. Why? Because you don't have coherence. The elements in the equation can't cohere. You have people whose race has the highest quintile income at 75%. 75% of whites are at the top quintile. Against blacks, whose top quintile is 13%. That's oil and water. You can't. There cannot be policy coherence. What will happen is then you have two merchant politicians trading with the blacks. That's why you see a person like Fori saying that blacks only have unemployment of 10%. And then ministers like Tawi and them, Meth and others following that nonsense and minimizing the pain that black people suffer and saying that maybe the statistician general things may have to be looked there. Look what? When you have that kind of situation, and then you have the treasury, which has brought business people at the center of the treasury, without the instruments that they had of an entrepreneurial state. We don't have an entrepreneurial state. And when that happens, you can't bring private companies at the treasury when you don't have instruments that you use and deploy to ensure that we have an entrepreneurial state. This is the problem. Now, don't tell us that there is no money. Money is education. And it's only money when you are educated. But if you think you separate this thing called money, it's there in its physical form and education is separate, then you haven't got a clue around value. And when you don't have a clue around value, you don't have a clue around values. So if a society doesn't have values, it will always look at the physical in order to express its values. That's where we are now, that we are looking at the physical, the blitz and everything, and at the expense of values such as education. So we have lost the plot.
Thank you so much, Dr. Lehohla. That's a lot of food for thought. We really appreciate you being part of this podcast.